Welcome to today's episode of the Normalized Surrogacy podcast by Surrogacy Mentor. I'm your host, Carrie Flamer Powell, experienced gestational surrogate, surrogacy agency founder, and owner of Surrogacy Mentor, where our aim is to help surrogates match with reputable surrogacy agencies for a safe, ethical, and enjoyable surrogacy journey. Today, I'm happy to welcome our very special guest, Joni Franklin of Franklin Law Office. Welcome, Joni.
Thank you so much for having me, Carrie. I'm very excited to be here.
Absolutely. I should say welcome back because we've done one before. So today we're going to talk about nightmare legal cases in surrogacy. But before we jump into this topic, which I'm super interested in, I just want to give a little bio on Joni. So as the owner of her own law firm since 2006, Joni is responsible for a full caseload of fertility law cases. Joni is based in Kansas and is also licensed in Oklahoma and Missouri. She represents gestational carriers and intended parents through the legal steps of their respective journeys, including gestational carrier contracts and parentage proceedings. So you've been in this field, almost 20 years at this point? Longer?
I've been a lawyer, 28 years now, but primarily focused in fertility law for the last 15.
Right. Wow. Okay. Well, I'm excited to chat with you. So today we're going to talk about, like I said, nightmare legal cases. And before we do that, can you just give us a 2-minute or less refresher on sort of the legal process for surrogacy, like the contracts and what's the purpose of that process in surrogacy?
Absolutely. So regardless of what state you're in, every surrogacy journey has about 2 basic parts. The first part is going to be that contract phase, and that's going to be the same wherever state you start in. We'll include things like statutory requirements for whatever state the journey is being conducted in, or where the jurisdiction will be for that journey, as well as those more personalized, sometimes more charged issues such as abortion care, restrictions or management during the pregnancy, other things that are more that personalized, individual belief system type information that we have to get that proper match for, which is why we rely on people like you, Carrie, to help us with that, to get that contract to fruition. Then once that contract is agreed upon by the parties, the next step would be the parentage. Parentage, it ranges wildly depending on which state you're going to be in. I am the prime example of that. My 3 states that I have all handle parentage differently. So we'll have those in place before the baby's born, well before that. And we use those orders both at the hospital and for the birth certificate purposes. My clients in Oklahoma will sign their parentage documents at the same time they execute the agreement. So we use those orders both at the delivery hospital and vital records. And it's a pretty ironclad system where no parentage can be challenged unless we have a major oopsie by the surrogate and she's genetically related to the child. And that's pretty much the process.
Awesome. Okay. So essentially the legal process, it differs state to state, but the legal process is the part of the surrogates and parents' journey where they're going through writing a legal contract that's going to dictate the legal and other aspects of the surrogacy process. So when you are doing this process, you come across, I'm sure, lots of different situations, scenarios, and unfortunately, nightmare scenarios. So what do we mean when we're talking about a nightmare case before we jump into your first one? What does that mean to you?
Absolutely. Primarily it means either 2 different things to me. One, sometimes during the matching process, we didn't get on the same page with the parties. I see this commonly in subjects like COVID vaccinations, termination of pregnancy, sometimes the lifestyle section. And it's not necessarily irretractable situation, but most of the time we have those well addressed in match meetings through the psychological evaluations, things like that. But occasionally, either the right questions weren't asked, or sometimes people interpret answers in different ways. So I often find we have maybe not a meeting on the minds on some of those big ticket items that are personally based, such as termination of pregnancy, lifestyle restrictions, and, overall, sometime contact issues, or the confidentiality issues of what's going to be shared. The second nightmare scenario I have is we are a small pod of people in the legal field that do assisted reproductive technology law. Because of that, and I think it's especially apparent in the Midwest. Just to give you an example, Carrie, there's probably 6 or less of our attorneys in each of my 3 states. So we all know each other very well. We know we're familiar with contracts, but the nightmare scenario I'm talking about is when we get somebody that wants to use an attorney that's not trained in art work. We all know attorneys are incredibly expensive. If it was a perfect world, we'd have the ability to have a lot of those costs reduced. We're not there yet. So we do have people who try to save money where they can. My biggest advice is don't do that on the attorney.
Yeah, no.
Because if I see somebody coming to me, especially at this point in my career, and they're like, oh, my brother's a divorce attorney, he can handle this. Or my cousin's a contractual attorney, so they work with contracts all the time. Maybe for a business deal or to build a building, construction, but not to make a baby. And there are a lot of intricacies. There are a lot of things that can and cannot be contracted away. And so when you get just a general practitioner or somebody that is not trained in art, it is always a nightmare scenario, in my opinion, because it takes the process longer. It takes an educational campaign to that other attorney. And it often blows up a lot of issues that normally wouldn't get blown up. So those are the 2 main things that I watch out for. Obviously, if you are talking about independent journeys, which means journeys for the audience that aren't screened or aren't matched with an agency or somebody like you, where people are starting from scratch off of somebody they've met on Facebook or things like that. That is truly an educational campaign as well. I am a big proponent of getting professional help in your match because I've seen the trauma, the tragedies, and the disappointments of people who are trying to individually match, and they don't understand the physicality requirements for a surrogate, the insurance requirements for a surrogate, what normal compensation would be, because there are some predatory people online that are telling them, just give me a little bit extra money and then you save all the money on agency cost, or you save all that, but you really don't, because you still have to do all of that. And then you're struggling on your own. So those are the 3 times that I see my hairs on the back of my neck go up and I'm like, oh, this is probably going to be a bumpier journey than normal.
Yeah, for sure. And thing about the attorneys, I always tell people, because I have my other company, Modern Parent Mentor, where we help people who are independent, mentor them. So if they can't afford an agency, we help them. Or if they just don't want to work with an agency, we help them and mentor them professionally so they don't get into trouble or someone doesn't get hurt. And so I always tell people, look, just because your brother is a eye doctor does not mean they can do your heart transplant. Like, there are doctors and then there are specialties, right? Same with attorneys. And surrogacy is one where there are places to cut corners. There are places you can save money in surrogacy, but the legal portion is not one of them. And people, I think, hear me when I start explaining it in that way, but it does take a little convincing, because you're right. It does come down to cost and people thinking that, it's interchangeable, and it's not.
Yes. And I also always try to tell people it's a lot easier to pay a little bit more on the front end than a lot of money on the back end to correct something or get it to where it needed to be. And I have been asked to step in on some of those cases. And I can tell you, when I have to go back to correct an error, if somebody didn't quite know what they were doing, it is cost 10 times more because it involves personal appearances, redrafting, relitigate, and sometimes litigating, which in a collaborative situation like we have with surrogacy, litigation is never a word you want to hear. So even if it is a little bit more on the front end, as long as it's done correctly, you are coming up with the major cost savings if something would go wrong.
Absolutely. So let's dig in. Let's talk about your first example of a nightmare case that you have been involved in and what happened.
Okay, I'm going to start out, I think, with my favorite one.
Okay.
And it also kind of nicely dovetails on what we were just talking about, like the importance to have an appropriately trained art attorney, especially in a jurisdiction that is so particular. For example, Oklahoma. Oklahoma has extreme child trafficking laws. And until we had our statute that passed in 2019, you literally could not, we had to do everything post-birth. You couldn't do anything within the state of Oklahoma because what it says is if you exchange money for any type of relinquishment of parental rights, it can violate the child trafficking laws. So Oklahoma came up with this particular statute. You have to comply with the statute. If you do, you don't violate those child trafficking laws. So this was an Oklahoma case. Everything went great. We got our pre-transfer orders, babies born beautiful, healthy, had international intended parents, got birth certificates, passports, everybody goes home. So you're like, Joni, why is this a nightmare? That sounds like the perfect case. Until I came back from court one day and I had a sheriff on the line for me.
Oh, no.
My assistant came out. She's like, this is the sheriff from such and such town and county. And it's regarding, I'll just call her my darling surrogate.
Yeah.
And I go, what's going on? They are at her door saying that she's being investigated for child trafficking. And I said, well, that's crazy. What's happened? So then I get the backstory from, I go, tell the sheriff I'll call him back, tell him I'm in court, which I was coming back. And I called my surrogate. My darling surrogate had an even more darling first grader who proceeded to go to show and tell and said, hey, my mommy just sold her baby for $50,000 to these lovely Chinese people, and they took the baby home and everybody's happy.
Oh.
Well, the teacher didn't quite know what to do with this, so they tried to call my surrogate. Well, what I later found out is she did utilize her funds to redo. They bought a beautiful Victorian older house. They were redoing it with those funds. And it's a small town, so they had to stay in the one motel that was there while the work was being done. So not only did the child say, my mom sold the baby for $50,000 to Chinese parents, she also said, well, I'm going to call your mommy and check on this. And she goes, oh no, we're homeless. We're homeless right now. And my surrogate said, yeah, I will never joke with my child again. I was trying to make it seem like an adventure. And I go, we're homeless for the next 4 weeks. We're going to stay at this hotel or the motel. You're going to love it. There's a pool. You can swim. It was in the summertime. And so the child just literally said they're homeless.
Oh my gosh.
Teacher goes to principal as a mandatory reporter and goes, what do I do with this?
Yeah.
And so the principal goes, well, we're mandatory reporters. I'm just going to call the sheriff and let them deal with it.
Right.
So they sent deputies out to the motel. My client, meantime, it's a town of 5,000, is mortified, right? She's like, what's going on? Calls me in a panic. It did take a good hour to get that straightened out, mostly because the deputies were really interested in knowing how this process worked.
Sure.
Originally, the sheriff goes, ma'am, we don't do that. We don't do that here. And I go, sir, I do it about 100 times a year there. So
Right.
you do.
We do.
And then I had to explain they wanted the documents in Oklahoma. They're sealed and sequestered. I said, you're going to have to get a warrant. You're going to have
Mhm.
to get an order. I can't turn those over. To which
Right.
then they say, well, that seems very suspect. And I said, or here's the statute. And that's what the statute says.
The suspect, or is it just lawful?
Right. It's regulated. And so at the end of the day, we got it fixed. But the moral of this story, I did actually change the structure of my internal contract. In the confidentiality clause, I do now put in there that we're allowed to communicate with minor children's teachers in case we ever have that situation again.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, the fact that you were able to fix it that quickly, I thought you were going to say it would take like a few weeks, like maybe there was like a whole thing.
Or if she got arrested or something.
Yeah.
And she did it, and it all got worked out. And it was kind of funny. The deputies actually go to her church, and they were very like, sorry. They went up and apologized, and she's like, maybe we shouldn't talk about this in church, but thank you.
Oh my gosh, small town.
That's my favorite, and has a happy ending, but involved me thinking outside the box really quickly, by the way.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's crazy. But you're right. That was like a happy ending one where, nobody got hurt except maybe just embarrassed
Correct.
and a little startled. But yeah, you have to be careful with what those kids say. My daughter said to one of the cashiers at the grocery store, my mommy's pregnant and she's giving it to 2 other mommies. And I'm like, well, she's not lying, but I don't really feel like explaining that.
Exactly. And that is kind of like the purpose of it. And luckily, I mean, she had made known to pretty much, I mean, she was pregnant, didn't come home with the baby.
Yeah.
But it is just funny how like a 30-second show and tell like rocked her world.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Okay. So that's a really good one. So let's see. Is there another one that you have that you could share with us?
So this was a true nightmare scenario, and it traumatized me greatly. I had married same-sex parents in Oklahoma. Everything fine and dandy, great. We get the pre-transfer order. So they're the legal parents even before their surrogate's pregnant. Surrogate gets pregnant on the first transfer. Everything's going great. About 4 months in, I get an email from one intended parent that says, I no longer want to be the parent, so I need you to retract the parentage orders. I had to politely respond, that is not how this works. Once you're a parent, you're a parent. And this isn't a situation where your surrogate isn't already pregnant, where we could have terminated the agreement. You have a baby on board and a baby on the way. Then I got emails from the other intended parent, which was, no, we're not retracting these orders. So I kindly told them, obviously, you guys are going to have a conflict of interest now. So I'm only going to be able to represent one. Here are some referrals. But just to let you know, there's no way to undo parentage. If you guys want to decide that one party doesn't want to be involved, you're going to have to address that in family court after the baby's born and in your home jurisdiction when you go home. So, lots more emails. I actually, in this specific scenario, I disclosed the conflict. I told him I would have to withdraw from one and kept getting communications. I even reached out to my local disciplinary administrator saying, I've done this. Meanwhile, surrogate's still gestating the baby, and then they go radio silent on me. Mm-hmm. I don't hear anything. Mm-hmm. And so it gets to the point where I'm sending, orders to the hospital. She's like 8 weeks from delivering. And I reach out and I say, hey, tell me who's going to be there. I want to make sure everybody is on board. What's going on? Right. And one of the intended parents had left the country.
Oh, no.
And of course, we can guess which one that was, the one that didn't want to be involved. other intended parent stepped up, was there. Everything worked out for the baby. And I guess this does have a happy, and I hope it has a happy ending as well. I was informed at the time of birth, other intended parent had a change of heart, came back, and at least as of the time they got the birth certificates, which was about 4 weeks after birth, they were still together. But it did make me change how I reviewed with clients. I thought I had been clear before, but I'm extra clear now. And I generally follow that up in writing with an email saying, these are signed. This means you guys are the parents, no matter what, under Oklahoma law, unless the baby is genetically related to your surrogate.
Nice.
And again, that is a situation where if you didn't have an art attorney, if you were going to a divorce attorney, that could have gone a lot worse because you have had all these challenges and things, and it could have ended up impacting the surrogate too, because they were prepared to drag her into it. So
sure. Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, it just goes to show you that, you know, at the end of the day, we're dealing with humans and we're dealing with real life, and real life involves divorce and breakups and changes in all sorts of circumstances, right? And you just never know what's going to happen during or right after a surrogacy journey. And the legal process and contract can only contemplate so many worst case scenarios. But you're absolutely right. Should something like this or worse happen, you want someone representing you that knows the ins and outs, not only of art law, but also the jurisdiction that you're dealing with, because even within art law, each jurisdiction can be wildly different, wildly specific, and you don't want someone who doesn't even know the basics of art law trying to help you in crisis.
correct. And we do actually contemplate this scenario within our contracts on a routine basis, if you know what you're doing, which is if the parties get divorced, jointly and severally liable for everything from the kid to the expenses to all of that. We do make it very clear that once you're the parent, you are the parent. But you are absolutely right. And I do find people that are on surrogacy journeys in particular, there's a reason we call them journeys, right? It's not point A to point B. It's a long, winding road to get where they are. And a lot of times that's a difficult journey. I mean, a lot of times surrogacy is the last option for them to have a genetically related child or even not a genetically related child. And you have to keep that in mind as a practitioner, because it's a contract to you. It's always a baby to them. Right. And it may be their last embryo. It may be their last chance. And so I always remind myself, one, I'm blessed to have my kids. And two, you have to be empathetic about that. And the same goes for a surrogate. And I do think that is something that's overlooked sometimes by new practitioners, especially new practitioners who didn't have their own fertility issues. Or that come out of a more aggressive style of litigation practice, divorce attorneys and things like that. It's a whole new creature. You have to advocate and you have to meet your fiduciary duty to your client, but it's a whole different ballgame in art law.
Yeah, it definitely is. And there's so much nuance and so many little things. And what I think also I hear you saying during this whole interview is each time something happened over the course of your career, you were able to bring that into your next case and update your contracts and change the way you do things. And that type of experience only comes from years of doing these types of cases, because the field of surrogacy and art law is constantly changing, and you're constantly having to keep up with all the different things that are happening in your cases, but also in the laws and the statutes and the industry. And it is definitely super specialized. And so I hope if people listening don't learn anything else from this, it's work with a qualified attorney. And so what are the credentials and the things people should be looking for when they're looking for an attorney?
So I think this is interesting, and I think there's a lot of different opinions on if there is some magic qualification. A lot of people think Quad A is an automatic qualification. I don't agree with that. I
And what
think
is Quad A? Because people don't know.
sure. I'm trying to think of what the acronym stands.
Academy of
We have
Assisted,
adoption and
I think it's Academy of Adoption and Assisted Reproductive Attorneys or something like that. But it's 4 A's. Oh yeah, A.
the subsection of ARDA. So yes, that is correct. So, and Quad A does have some specific requirements, like a certain number of years you had to practice, you have to have recommendations. But at the end of the day, in my opinion, what is more important is to do your independent research for each individual jurisdiction. So I think that those things aren't going to be able to be established by being a fellow of ARDA or Quad A. Those are going to be something that are going to take individual research on the part of either the agency, which always does a pretty good job of that, or just, going online, asking for referrals, asking for things like that. I also highly recommend to anybody listening to this, whether you're a potential surrogate or a potential intended parent, if you are going to hire an attorney, have an introduction call with them.
Yeah.
I compare, especially in surrogacy attorneys, selecting a lawyer is much like selecting a doctor. If you get to a doctor and you're like, I don't feel this vibe, and they're not listening to me, or they're talking over me, or I don't understand them, it's the same thing with an attorney. If you are not on that mojo and you aren't communicating, or if they don't want to answer your questions, or you're getting, what, then that's not a good match for you. I may not be a match for every single person, but I always give them the respect to give them an introduction call, tell them a little bit about myself, tell them how the process is going to work in whichever state or jurisdiction they're looking to do the journey in, and give them a chance to ask questions. And if you're not feeling the comfort level, call another person, because it's fine if everything goes smoothly, but you and I, Carrie, it goes great until it doesn't. And then you got to figure it out. And so you really want to have that underlying relationship.
100% agree. Well, that's all such good advice. And I really appreciate you taking the time to share these with us. Hopefully people listening learned, if nothing else, that super important to have a great attorney, and also just super important to remember that we're dealing with humans. Life happens. We want to try and contemplate as much as we can during the legal process, but at the end of the day, a really good match with really good professional and legal and mental health support is so important, because it is a journey. As you said, things are going to happen because life happens. Life doesn't stop. All of the hard and difficult and crazy things in life don't stop just because you've started surrogacy. So appreciate you sharing this with us. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and absolutely. And any departing advice I would give is that don't panic if something comes up during negotiations. Don't panic if there is a disagreement. Most of the time we can wordsmith around concerns, making everybody feel safe and secure in their own belief system. So again, if you get a good match, even if you hit a bump in the road in negotiations and you have a good experienced art attorney, we'll get you through it. We'll get you through it. The agencies will get you through it. Mentorships will get you through it. So don't panic. If you have those people in place, you're going to get a successful journey almost all of the time.
Love it. Well, thank you again. It's been so nice to see you, and appreciate you again taking the time to be here.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, Carrie. I appreciate the opportunity to speak as well.
Absolutely. So that brings us to the end of this episode of the Normalized Surrogacy podcast. Again, I'm Carrie Flamer-Powell, and I want to thank Joni Franklin of Franklin Law Office for joining me today. Be sure to check us out online at surrogacymentor.com if you're interested in knowing whether surrogacy might be right for you. Take our easy 2-minute quiz on the website. You can also learn about intended parent mentoring and matching services at modernparentmentor.com. Subscribe to this podcast to learn more about gestational surrogacy and how to have a safe, ethical, and enjoyable journey. Talk to you next time.